Hey everybody, Blair Nightingale here. Second week 2 starting out. This is our Stock Talk Thursday, specifically hot or not. If you were with us last week, we started this new series. First time we've ever done it. Awesome response, great experience. I love doing it. We're going to do it again today. Hot or not on Stock Talk. What is that? What are we talking about? Well, last week we looked at two stocks that a lot of people are talking about. You're seeing it in the news a lot. Is it hot? Is it not? We looked at Twitter. We looked at Tesla. If you missed that, head on back. You can access all the recordings if you're joining us on Facebook, on YouTube. We've put the previous recordings up there for you to see. I remind you of that every week because I don't want you to miss any of what we've gone over if you did miss it. That said, week 1 was Stock Talk regarding Tesla Twitter. This week, a little bit different. We're doing Stock Talk, but we're getting a little bit outside of stocks today. Because why? Because everybody's talking about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about something that is in the news every day right now. And a lot of people are talking about this. A lot of people are asking about this. Now, this happened, I'm going to say 3 years ago almost. 2017, late 2017, 2018, a lot of people were talking about Bitcoin and something similar. In fact, something even bigger has happened in Bitcoin in the last 3 to 4 months, give or take a little bit of time, because we've seen Bitcoin go on a historic run once again. Some of you are wondering, what is Bitcoin? I never even heard of it. Chances are, though, if you're on here, you've heard of it and you're still going, I don't really know what it is. But I heard that it went from 20,000 to 42,000 in almost no time. And people are getting in on it. And maybe you heard somebody made money and maybe you heard somebody lost money. Well, you are in the right place today because that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, what do I need to know? What is it? What are the risks? Everything that I think that you need to know when we're talking about Bitcoin, and really coming down to whether or not I think Bitcoin is hot or I think it's not. And that's what we're going to get to at the end. That said, as always, you guys are joining us live today. You can go ahead and drop a comment. For me, it's right over here on the screen. And if you're out there and you want to say hi, let me know where you're from. Ask any questions. We had some excellent questions last time around. And I mention every time, that's part of my favorite. That's one of my favorite features of what we get to do here when we are on live is ask questions. So let me know who you are. Let me know where you're from. And I will be able to answer any questions that you pop on there as well. So let me just show you something to start out here. Because for those of you who don't know, I want you to get a look at what we're really dealing with. Of course, here we have S&P. Here is Bitcoin. Okay, this is the Bitcoin chart. Now we're going to just show you something quick, and then I'm going to come back to this in a minute. We may pop in and out of here through the course of the broadcast today. Let me make sure that you can see that. Good, you can see it. Here we are, back right here, late October, okay? So not that far back. Bitcoin trading at 12 approximately. I'm rounding down some, but about $12,000, 12,000 and a quarter, right? And in a very short amount of time, it goes up to nearly 42,005. Okay, obviously the biggest part of the run we see here really started in December, right? We were at mid-December here. And by the first week of January, we had more than doubled. We had seen it, obviously, more than double. We're talking $20,000 plus in value over an extremely short amount of time. This is why people are talking about this. This is why people are talking about this. I'm going to show you a little further back in 2018 when a lot of people in the office, I was in the office in Dallas and Tradeway, and we were just watching Bitcoin in the morning one day go 16,000. In front of our eyes, 16,000, 17,000, 18,000. 19,000, and it stopped just shy of 20,000. I believe that was back in 2018, maybe late 2017. So it's just a huge mover, extremely volatile, and it's got a lot of people excited. But I think you're in the right place because I want you to understand, what am I really dealing with here? And how can I feel like I know what I need to know? That's what I want to equip you with. Jeffrey, I see you there. Benjamin, I spoke to Benjamin earlier on the phone today, actually, at Tradeway. So glad to see you guys on here. First of all, that is really, why is this even on the radar as much as it is? In fact, Janet Yellen actually made some comments. I'm going to come back to this, but she made some comments earlier today regarding Bitcoin. So the government is paying attention. Why would they pay attention? There's a lot of things I think you need to know before we can really land on a spot to say, hey, is this stock hot or not? And that's my biggest thing. I want you to understand what's going on here, because a lot of people I find are talking about it on the surface. They're excited that it's rising, but oftentimes we don't help ourselves as traders and investors when we throw money at something, which is the way I would describe it. We throw money at something when we don't understand what it is. See, we don't want to throw money at anything. We want to invest. And to me, investing happens when you understand at least some of what is going on, or, you're trusting somebody else to know. But as we always say around Tradeway, nobody cares about your money like you do. So if I can help you understand, that would be my goal. I mentioned already, this has more than doubled in a very short amount of time. It's raced up to $42,000 approximately was its high. So what happens? Well, when something like this is running up, seems like it's just not going to go down, excitement gets higher. And as excitement gets higher, more people put money in. Why? Because they want to grab onto that rocket as it's flying up. What does that do? Causes it to rise even higher. And it just goes, and goes. And it may not necessarily have the fundamental structure. What do I mean by that? Well, it may not fundamentally be worth that much outside of the fact that speculative investors in the Bitcoin market want to drive the price up. They want to buy it. They want to get on that train. But what happens as soon as one major player lets go of that rocket ship? They let go, somebody else goes, I'm out. Somebody else. Why? Because the underlying value of Bitcoin in this case may not warrant a $42,000 price tag. But it got that high because all the investors got so excited and bought it. Enter you and I coming in going, well, we hear everybody talking about this. I want to get on this. I don't want to miss out on this. And we don't know if we're buying in at a point that is extremely risky, and we can get stuck, as they say, holding the bag, which means I bought at or near the top, and then it falls very quickly. And then what do? I don't want that to happen to any of you guys. So when we see something like this, it takes some wisdom to stop and be cautious. And that's why I think you're on here today. You hear people say things like, if you'd invested, and this is true, by the way, if you'd invested just $1,000 in Bitcoin in 2011, okay, you'd have $4.28 million today, right? That's 10 years, respectively, 10 years ago, $1,000, $4.2 million. Now, that's the dream any investor wants. Hey, I can invest a pretty small amount of money, and if you're willing to hold something that long, you can do that. Well, right now, a Bitcoin is not going to cost you $1,000. To own a coin is going to cost you 30 grand plus to own one coin, $30,000. So that's one thing you need to know. Okay. Now you can potentially, as an investor, you can buy parts of a coin. You don't need to purchase a whole coin. I wouldn't need to purchase a whole coin. But it would cost you that much for a whole coin, $32,000. So let's take a step back here. That's a little bit of what is happening. But I know people out there are asking, and you've been asking because I've been hearing that. And I think really what that is what's the question? What is Bitcoin? I mean, really, what is it? So you may have heard things like, it's a digital currency, or it's a cryptocurrency. Okay, it's encrypted. So what's important to know about that? Because those terms can be a little bit strange, a little bit confusing. Well, first of all, it has no physical property. Okay, this particular money, if you want to call it that, currency, has no physical property. It's strictly digital. It only exists. Now, a lot of the financial dealings that you and I do now are cashless, aren't they? Now, we're working in dollars or whatever currency we're working with, but it still has a physical representation, or at least a large portion of the money supply is still found with a physical representation. In this case, Bitcoin is only digital. There is no physical asset to Bitcoin, okay? From there, you have to understand that this started just over 10 years ago. I mentioned what you might have today if you bought into Bitcoin in 2011. It really started in 2009, and I'm not going to go too deep down this hole. You can certainly look this stuff up online if you'd like to. But some anonymous people or person, we don't know, who really started it, registered the original domain website, started this. Bitcoin is actually something that, again, it's strictly digital. So it started out trading. You could purchase it at a value for just pennies. Okay, it wasn't even on an exchange initially to be able to purchase it. And the person who had registered the original website for Bitcoin is actually anonymous. We still don't know, even though some have claimed they know and some have claimed, hey, it was me. We actually don't know. So we don't know who started it. And here's why I think that's important for you to know. Because one of the things we're looking at here is I want to understand a little bit about it. Why? So I can understand what I'm getting into, or what I'm even talking about listening to when people are talking about Bitcoin. You know, it's a bit of a mystery. And I think what's most important to you is that Bitcoin is not tied to any company, any centralized company, any government, any bank, right? It's not attached to some kind of transactional company, Visa or Square, or some of these. There's many different companies that facilitate financial transactions. Now, why is that important to us? Well, it's important because, listen, you and I, if we're going to exchange USD, US dollars, or you're going to purchase something from a retailer, there's going to be a go-between you and the retailer, depending on how you pay for it. You might use Apple Pay or a Cash App of some kind that transfers money to pay for things. You may use Visa, MasterCard, any of those major credit cards. There's processing that goes on. Why is that important? What am I talking about that for right now? Well, the reality is that if anything ever happens that's unfavorable, or you have a question, or needs to be refunded, or whatever the case might be, you have some recourse. You are able to go to that transactional middleman, if you will, and plead your case or explain or have some kind of recourse in these different scenarios that can come up. With Bitcoin, it does not work that way. There is no middleman, okay? Now, you may buy and sell from an exchange, okay? But that still is a transfer of money to or from you that cannot be reversed by appealing to a middleman, because there is no middleman. Example, if you were to send me Bitcoin, okay, you would have, and I don't want to get too far down this side of it because I think that goes beyond the scope of what we're looking at today, but you and I, each as Bitcoin holders, owners, would have what's called a digital wallet, okay? It's something online that will hold your Bitcoin, and it's protected so that only you would be able to access it. Only you would be able to access yours. Only I would be able to access mine. But once you transfer money, Bitcoin in this case, from your wallet to, say, my wallet, there's no way you could get that back unless I choose to send it. Okay, so That's an important thing to know. It's a very unique property of Bitcoin. And I want people to understand that this is an aspect of Bitcoin. Okay. This is maybe something that some people don't know. The last thing I'm going to say, some of you out there who are very excited about Bitcoin, you know a lot about this stuff. Some of us, most of us probably don't know a lot about this, but you've maybe heard this term kicking around, and it's blockchain. Okay, this is blockchain technology. I'm not going to go far into what is blockchain, but here's what I basically want you to understand. When you talk about cryptocurrency, digital currencies, and in this case, Bitcoin, which is really the flagship currency in this whole space, right? There are many now other digital currencies, but Bitcoin is really that flagship one that's worth the most. It's in the news the most. It's for several reasons kind of taken center stage. Well, this blockchain technology is really the fact that because it's a digital currency, every single time there is a transaction that occurs in Bitcoin, it automatically goes into a ledger, right? It's like bookkeeping. It goes right into the ledger. It can't be altered. It can't be skipped. It can't be erased. This is why a lot of people say, and this is why it's important what I'm saying to traders or investors today. A lot of people say, well, this is the future of currency because we've got this blockchain aspect to it. Because everything is recorded. Now, there's a whole conversation there, but that is a big part of what this is. I will say this up front. I am not here today to say, as far as an ethical, political perspective on, is it good, is it bad? A lot of people get passionate about that. That's not what's helpful for me today. I don't think that's what's helpful to you. What we're looking at is this as investors and traders. Is it hot? Is it not? But that gives us a little bit of an idea of what Bitcoin is. It can feel a little bit weird because it's a newer thing, but ultimately it's a digital currency. It doesn't have any physical representation, and it has some unique aspects of it because it is just a strictly virtual currency. So it can do some things that are a little bit different. And I think as people who think about buying Bitcoin, or hearing other people say Bitcoin is going to be widely accepted soon. That's what a lot of the speculators are saying. It's going to be widely accepted. It's going to be legitimized. And if it is, the price will go to boom, boom. You're going to hear all kinds of predictions, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, whatever the case might be, if they have that bullish bias that it's going to go up. But we need to understand a little bit more about what it is. And then I think the biggest thing is that, we have to understand the risks, okay? So they're looking for that acceptance and that feeling of legitimacy. And sometimes in these big, bull runs that they get, these rushes upwards where we hit 42,000, I think that has come in part because there's a sense of this is going to become more legitimized. But there's two sides to that coin, as they say. And so what I want to do is make sure that you understand the risks. Jeffrey says, I'm reading a few comments here. Why would you have invested $1,000 in 2011? You couldn't spend it on anything. Well, it would have been a speculative investment back then, wouldn't have been? Okay. So you would have purchased it thinking, hey, this could potentially be the future. This is worth it to me. I'm going to purchase some of this. You wouldn't have necessarily been able to spend it anywhere. Now there are some places that accept it. There are ATMs that have it. Of course, you're not taking anything physical out of the ATM because there is no physical representation of it. So just a little bit more legitimization, or at least it's seen in that way, a little bit more legitimization from then, where you've got some retailers on board. But even now, that's not widespread. And so people are buying it really as an investment for the future, not necessarily exchanging currency for a use. Like you might, go to a foreign country and you've got to have that currency to go and spend money there. This is really just still strictly an investment tool at this point. But again, it has some unique factors, which I think create some unique risks. And we're going to go over that in a second. Mario says, so you're explaining, in a sense, technical analysis on Bitcoin. Well, I think, I touched on that a little bit on the chart. I haven't given a technical breakdown of what it's doing necessarily, other than to show you Bitcoin has increased dramatically. I mean, that's not debatable. It's increased dramatically over a short period of time. A fundamental analysis is a little bit more of what I'm talking about today, but not in the sense that I'm saying it's a good buy or not a good buy. I'm more or less explaining this is really what it is. So we need to at least understand some basics about what it is, because I'm going to get into some of the risks here. And that's what I want you to understand, because a lot of the talk is, it's that gold rush mentality of, I got to get in on this. I want to get on this. The more discerning, maybe more patient, are saying, well, I want to, or I don't know if I should. What do I need to know? Whereas I know some people just run out and they'll just buy it. Or I even hear people making the recommendation that people just go out and get some. Why? Because it's moving. Well, I would say there's a few things we need to add to that. And that's what I would want you to know. What are the risks? What are the risks that you're getting in on? How do you define when a good time versus a bad time to get in the stock is? Okay. I guess I'm so used to saying stock, to get into this particular currency. Now, I want to stop there for a second. And I want to say, we're going to talk about risks here. Specifically at Tradeway, we only work in the equities markets, meaning we only buy and sell stocks. We trade options, which are also attached to these equities, these companies, these stocks in the US stock market. So we only trade that. We don't do Forex. We don't do cryptocurrencies. We don't do futures, for those of you who are familiar with futures contracts and commodities and things like that. It's not to say that some of those aren't legitimate. They are. We just, some areas don't go into, because it's just beyond the scope of what we focus on. On the other hand, when it comes to the cryptocurrency markets, it's David, our founder and CEO, David Mitchell. It's really his perspective that, most people just don't have the experience necessary to really be able to navigate something like this. And I think, again, that there are unique risks here. So I'm going to explain some of those in a minute. I think those are the most important things. And that may mean that for some people, this is just not an area you're ever going to go. Let's see. Fundamental, that's what I meant. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. So awesome. Okay, what are some of the risks? I mean, let's just look at this, okay? My biggest message today is this. And to me, this is what comes down to whether it's hot or not, okay? You're going to learn as an investor or trader, what is my risk tolerance? For higher risk averse people, I don't like a lot of risk, Blair. And there's many factors that can go into that, being your personality, your investment goals, the kind of capital you have in your life, how old, how young you are. All those kinds of things play into it. So I'm not going to make a blanket statement on the broadcast as to here's how you can categorize your personal risk tolerance. It's something that we figure out a little bit more one-on-one, or something that you can discover on your own to know what kind of risk I'm really okay taking. But this is a high risk environment. When we're talking about Bitcoin, this is a high risk environment. Now, I told you we were going to go back to the chart. Let me show you something really quick here. You saw it earlier. We just didn't highlight this. So what we tend to get caught up in is this, right? This huge run. Now we go back to Mario's question, giving a technical perspective on Bitcoin. Boom, up it goes. And then what did we do? We lost in 3 days. In 3 days, 30%. Now that's down to this low. It didn't stay at this price, right? This is on January 11th. So we made a high here, but from here, this day's high, that's the 9th to the 10th to the 11th. It dropped 30%, just about 30%. So for an entire asset, in this case, Bitcoin, to lose that much money in such a short amount of time. Some people like to cite, I read some stuff earlier, they like to cite, well, here are some major companies that lost X amount of money when they were, or Amazon was one that was quoted. Well, I mean, I would say one thing. One, then you would have to understand the risks on those as well. So that's still true. But number two, this happened in 3 days. So if you have no real structure for entry, you don't know what it is, why it's doing what it's doing, and the kind of risks that can bring it down, like today, what's happening today. I'll get back to that in a minute. This thing can drop considerably. Now, I had a friend, a very good friend, who did a considerable amount of trading activity in Bitcoin. Now, this was not a Tradeway student. I said already that's beyond the focus of what we focus on, and it's outside of the realm of what we think is best for our students. However, you get to make your own decisions. This individual did trade in these markets for some time and ultimately decided at some point, seeing the extreme volatility of something like this was just not worth it to him to be in that environment, especially as a trader. Now, some others may disagree because volatility, right? Volatility in the price action is part of what a trader wants. But at some level, there are certain risks that go beyond what is helpful for a trader because it's very difficult for us to protect our capital. So you have to understand, yes, the stock went on a big run and it took 2 months to do it, but in 4 days, it lost 30%. You say, well, Blair, it recovered. Well, not really. It didn't get all the way back. It's actually making lower highs now. So am I saying it's going to drop off a cliff here? No, I'm not going to predict, but I can tell you the information on the chart says this thing has really wild price swings. So when I say this is not for the risk averse, that is part of the reason why. It is not for the risk averse because it can move really fast against you. A couple other things. I said the chart is very volatile, but this stock is susceptible to news. It's very susceptible to news. What's one of the reasons that Bitcoin is very susceptible to news? Well, a lot of the fundamental movement of this stock, as I mentioned earlier, I keep saying stock, of this coin, of this asset, is that they are looking for acceptance, looking for legitimacy. Okay. I remember in 2018, there were talks, perhaps Amazon was going to start accepting Bitcoin payment. Maybe Apple would start working with them on some level. Some of those things at the time, just the rumor of it would create spikes in the price going up because they thought, ooh, that could mean more legitimacy. What does that mean if it has more legitimacy? It means more people might be using it, which means it becomes more scarce. If more people want to get Bitcoin, now we've got more people grabbing at a limited supply. By the way, Bitcoin will have a limited supply. There's not an unlimited amount of Bitcoins. You say, well, I thought this was digital. Can't they just make more coins? The way Bitcoin is set up, there will only be so many coins. Okay, so there is a finite supply of coins. There's a little bit more to say about it than that, but basically you just got to know there's only a certain amount of coins. So if this becomes more, quote, legitimized, then supply and demand kicks in and the price can go up. Now that didn't necessarily, in fact, in the cases I mentioned, Amazon and Apple, that did not happen. But that's what they're looking for. So when some news comes out that seems to say it may get legitimized, it can go up. Something like today where Janet Yellen comes out and says, we're going to be taking a closer look at Bitcoin because there are some pretty significant risks here. And we're looking at resisting embracing Bitcoin versus, agreeing with it. So that has actually caused it to tank today. So it's very news susceptible. And of course, news isn't something that you can regulate. You could pay attention. I don't mean regulate so much as that's not something that you're going to trade on based on news. And I'm specifically talking more so, like I've said in weeks past, we're looking at trading more than we're looking at long-term investing. Obviously, you can come at this both ways, but really, especially when we're talking about trading, we've got to understand these risks that create a much higher risk profile for something like this than it would be otherwise. News can always affect stocks. But again, this is very highly susceptible to news. And so that's a risk that I think we need to take into account. If you are going to do something like this, you have to know that that is a part of it, yes, but I think an increased or an even more than normal intense part of it. Now, another thing I would say is even in news, when you're looking at stocks, you have to understand that if you're trading in the US stock market, there are many even exchanges to buy and sell Bitcoin, but those markets are not regulated in the way that they would be if we're looking at stocks, okay? I talk to people who ask me questions about something like penny stocks. Can I buy and sell penny stocks? Well, there's a lot to talk about there that we won't go into today, but something that is important about that question in light of Bitcoin is that there are some stocks that are on exchanges. They're penny stocks, but they're on certain exchanges. And that creates a level of regulation, of visibility, and not vulnerability, transparency that these companies must have. And the reason for that is in large part to protect the investor, to make sure these companies are who they say they are doing what they say they're doing. They're on the up and up. That's a very important thing. Well, Bitcoin does not have that. Now, Bitcoin is not connected to quarterly earnings, but how does that affect you as an investor? Well, you have to know something simple like the stock market. If a stock or an exchange, a major exchange in and of itself drops a certain amount in one day, okay, they will use what's called a breaker. Now, we saw some of this for those of you who were involved in the stock market last year when we saw the coronavirus shutdowns. We saw that a lot of the exchanges had hit breakers. And that means if the stocks or the exchanges drop fast enough, okay, far enough, then a breaker kicks in and trading is halted. Usually at first it's for 15 minutes, then it's a little bit longer, then it's for the day. If it keeps dropping at that rate, eventually they'll stop trading for the day. This allows traders, it allows the market to stabilize, take a step back, think it through, and it can stop panic selling. The opposite is also true, and I saw this in March as well. As things shot up, it can go to a certain level where it becomes almost hysteria and a breaker will go off. Yeah, Jeffrey says the breakers were tripping every day last March. Those things were implemented after previous crashes in the stock market to protect investors because it can get so emotional, it gets out of control, and something can be wiped out very quickly. Well, these breakers are one example of some things that are in place to protect investors and stabilize the markets. Well, Bitcoin doesn't have that same stabilization, doesn't have that same system or measures, the word I'm looking for, in place. Another thing I would say, and I mentioned this a little bit, is that, something like today, Treasury Secretary comes out and says something about it saying, hey, we need to be cautious here. That means not only that there's some susceptibility to news that, again, I think is heightened, but we also have to watch and see when part of the popularity and part of the rhetoric and message of these coins is that it may provide an alternative to central currency. Okay. And again, I'm not making a political statement and I'm not even arguing against that necessarily, but I am saying we have to understand that if that's part of the message, hey, this could be an alternative currency. We may not even need those other currencies anymore. We've got to be careful and watch how governments react to things like that, especially since these markets are so volatile. So a lot of different pieces in there to understand the unique risks. Now, obviously, there are some unique benefits to this. As I mentioned, some of the transparency, transactions, it's not connected to a centralized power. That's a plus. And there really is, because the stock, again, the coin has been moving as dramatically as it has, there are some opportunities for people to go ahead and purchase Bitcoin. If you had purchased it 6 months ago, you would have seen a pretty stark increase in the price of that coin that you had purchased. So it's not to say that there isn't some kind of opportunity here, because there is an asset that is increasing. There are at times some of those hopes for legitimacy, they are coming into play, where there are certain hedge funds, certain financial instruments, futures contracts are going to include, they'll be on Bitcoin, if you're familiar with those are. They're just different financial instruments that are within our stock market that are actually going to be tied to Bitcoin in a meaningful way. And that has been part of that legitimacy, which has driven prices higher. So there is a little bit of fundamental activity going on there, but it's still very early on, seeing that really wide range of acceptance. So if you are looking at this and you're having a conversation about this, maybe you're even thinking of buying some, you've been buying some, whatever the case might be, these are some of the things that I think you need to know. You need to understand the unique risks around this currency. And I would say a lot of what I've said, there are some things that are unique just to Bitcoin, or BTC, as we call it. There are a lot of other coins, tons of other coins that are being offered. It's almost like a gold rush, if you will, a coin rush. Some of them more legitimate than others. There's a whole bunch of stuff there to cover. But basically, a lot of what I said is true of those other coins as well. So that's something that we need to be aware of. So, of course, the question then is, Bitcoin hot or not? Well, to answer that question, let's head on back to the chart. And I'm going to say this. This is hot. There's no doubt about it. That is hot. This is not. Right now, today, if I had to tell you, based on the chart, not my personal opinion, based on this chart, is it hot? No, it is not. It is down. It's down 12% in a single day today. Okay. And it's down back almost to where it was when it lost 30%. You know, I know there are people that got in right up here, just jumping into that gold rush, and unfortunately seeing it pull back. Now, I'm not going to say for a long-term buy and hold position that something like Bitcoin isn't going to continue to come back. Okay. I do know this. I said I was going to show you this earlier. Just to give you a picture of that volatility, look at how sharp that was. I mean, this rise is huge. Well, there was one similar back here. It topped out. Remember, I said it got just about 20. In fact, looks like the high there was 19,891.99. So almost $19,892 per coin. And then it toppled. And where did it go to? It went down around $3,200. Okay. It's tried, it struggled, it kept going. And then, of course, we've got another big run, which is why we're talking about it, because it's been back in the news. If this is something that somebody was saying, you know what, I have a little bit of money and I put a little bit in years ago and I'm willing to just let it sit there, and it's a highly speculative investment that I know I could lose everything, I would understand that somebody may choose to do that way. Somebody else may not choose to do that way. If you were looking to just jump in on the gold rush, that would be my caution. This is hot, but right now it's not. And for most investors, for most people out there, the kind of volatility that you're going to see on this is going to be above what you're probably looking for. And it creates some unique challenges, despite the fact that there are some unique opportunities. So as I said last week when we went over this, I am not coming on here with hot or not to say buy it or don't buy it. Okay. That's not my purpose on here, is to say go buy or don't buy Bitcoin. I don't predict, but I assess risk, because that's what traders do. So for me right now, I'm saying that for most folks, this is going to be a high risk speculative investment. And for that reason, you need to be well aware of what you're doing. And where it's at today is definitely dropping. And that for me is a not. Jeffrey says, I think the powers that be will force us to use new currency by printing the dollar to oblivion. Well, there's a whole nother conversation to be had there, isn't there, in terms of some of the economic policies that are rolling out, printing money, stimulus, all those kinds of things. And perhaps that's a conversation we need to have in the weeks to come. Today, we're talking Bitcoin, hot or not. If you enjoyed this broadcast, you think anybody else out there needs to hear this, go ahead, like, share, send it on over to somebody else, recommend it, post somebody's name in the comments if you want them to see this and watch this video. They can look at this. With that said, thank you everybody for being on here. We're going to be back on Monday as always, and we will be doing another one of these next week as well. I look forward to seeing you then. If you have any questions, let us know, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.